Arab is a global engineering consulting firm. We do anything from tunneling design to building design to master planning of cities and all the nitty-grits in between. I'm in a team called the Foresight Research and Innovation Team. And the first question you will probably have is, what is foresight? Foresight is essentially a terminology that describes forward-looking activities within a corporate context. So it's about trying to understand the future, trying to look at the trends that are shaping the future of our business and trying to translate what that means for us and our clients. So that's predominantly what I do as my day job. As a team, we're a global team. We're not present in every office of Arab, but we're present in some of our main ones. We've got presence in Australia, in East Asia, in Europe, our UK MEA region, and also our Americas region. So we try to be global. We try to be global in particular when it comes to thinking about the future, not only thinking about developed countries, but also emerging economies and so forth. We as a team do three different things. We work for Arab as a think tank. We work with Arab, collaborating with our businesses to help deliver different types of projects. So, for example, becoming part of a building design team or a master planning team to help them understand what the trends are shaping their specific context. And we also do a tiny bit of external consulting. That's only about between a third and a fifth of our work, where we help other companies explore the future of the built environment. So we work, for example, a lot with chemical companies who are trying to understand future opportunities around construction materials, for example, or vehicle manufacturers who are trying to understand how their products and services might be used in cities in the future. So those are the type of things we would do for a company. Why do we do all of this? We do all of this because we recognize that change is constant. Change is something that we cannot change. It's happening all the time. So we as a company operating in a market environment that is subject to constant change have to recognize that and have to try to find ways to adapt to that and to translate what that change means for us. And of course, parts of the built environment in particular are changing at an absolutely fundamental pace. This is Shanghai. I was in Shanghai a couple of weeks ago. Shanghai's Pudong district in the 1990s. You may not recognize this image, but you can see quite clearly there's not a single high-rise building. And this is the same place only 20 years later. So you can see some parts of the world are changing at an absolutely phenomenal rate. So it's really, really important for us to recognize that, because we then, as designers of this built environment, have an obligation to make sure that we get it right. And of course, it's not only the built environment that is changing, it's also society. You've got the papal inauguration of Pope Benedict in 2005. So only 10 years ago, not that long ago, you got one little mobile phone down in the corner here. Yeah, one mobile phone 10 years ago, and this is the same event in 2013. So you can see the way we communicate, the way we engage with people, the way we work, play, interact has been changed fundamentally through information technology. So change is happening all around us. Looking at some of the global trends that we're seeing, the population is increasing quite rapidly, so from 7 billion today to about 9 billion by the middle of the century. We know that cities are becoming much more important. People are living much more urban. So what challenge does that bring in terms of how to design cities, how to operate cities, how to provide housing to people? In particular, in Asia and Southeast Asia, this is a big, big challenge that are facing governments and societies there. We also know that the population is aging. So you can see here the population pyramids from 1950 all the way to 2050. You can say that in 1950 it was a very kind of steep pyramid, and it's starting to bulge out more and more people worldwide start to get older, and there's less supply from the bottom, if you like, less children being born over time. So that's essentially why the population is growing, is because we've actually already reached so-called peak child. There's not a time anymore where more children will be born in the world. It's all about people aging and living longer, which is causing the population to increase. And this is having impacts on our society. For example, older people in the labor force. You can see that in the global aggregates, it's rising quite significantly in the number of older people, 55 plus, in the labor force. And it's not only a problem of the advanced economies, crucially, it's also a problem of emerging economies like China. So there it's an even bigger problem, which has impacts for us, for example, when it comes to finding the right people to work for our company there. The world is also becoming richer, so there's an expanding world middle class, and it's also consuming more stuff. So you can see that world energy consumption is still expected to increase right rapidly, again posing a big, big challenge for us to live more sustainable, use less energy and be more energy efficient, and a lot of the products and solutions we see around here still address that issue today. Change is constant, but context is variable. it's actually quite easy to try to identify the trends that are shaping our future. The population, the urbanization, the aging, and so forth. Much, much harder to translate what that means for us, for our specific future. So the question that we then have to ask ourselves is, what does our future look like? And the our can be your company, your clients, your project that you're working on. But that's essentially the type of question that we have to explore when we think about our own future. So I just want to look at 3 different topics today, really quickly, and some of the things that we're seeing within those spaces. And the first one is climate change and resilience. The second one will be smart and autonomous systems. And the third one will be new patterns of value creation. So starting with the first one, climate change and the topic of resilience is now becoming an increasingly important part of the dialogue in the built environment, if you like. Lots and lots of city and city governments are thinking about how can we make our city more resilient to shocks. And this can be climate shocks, but it could also be environmental or social shocks. But it's about how quickly can a city essentially recover from those shocks and get back to normal. Because we know there's loads of examples like the Hurricane Sandy and the impact it had on New York and the New York transport systems, where these risks are increasing and there's growing pressure to deal with them because of the impacts they are having on urban systems in particular. Now, looking at some of the risks we face, this is the IPCC estimates for global sea level rise. We know that already today 233 of the world's 600 largest cities are at high flood risks. So as this goes up, and a lot of cities are in coastal areas, the risk to urban space is only going to increase. In a city like Melbourne, for example, which is something we looked at in a little more detail, the number of people impacted by sea level rise will increase from about 100,000 today to about nearly 1 million by the end of the century. So big, big impacts on our urban systems, big, big impacts on the people living within these spaces. So it's an important trend to recognize. So what can we do about it? We can start to think about, first of all, what this new normal in the future will look like. So what will be the new normal when it comes to climate and climate risk? This is a software we've developed at Arup called WeatherShift. It allows you to use IPCC data to map future climate realities. So this is the data for Singapore. So you can see, for example, that an average day in Singapore in April has this temperature cycle. So the temperature is low in the morning and it rises throughout the day and it peaks at about midday and then goes down again. So what we can see from the data is that today, the average high temperature in April on a day would be around 34 degrees. We know that by the middle of the century, it could be as high as 36, and towards the end of the century, it could be as high as 38. So we got that data already based on the models that have been developed by the IPCC, and we can use this data to make better design decisions today. Because some of the infrastructure or some of the buildings that we put in place in Singapore today, for example, as a company, will be still around when this new normal climate temperature will be there. So how should cooling be designed in a space? Or how should materials respond to this heat risk that we're facing? So very interesting how we can use this to think about the future a bit more. This is Hamburg's Hafen City, near where I was born in Germany, designed with future climate risk in mind. So Hamburg sits on the Elbe River, very, very prone to storm floods. So you can see that the whole landscape design is very robust. So as the water recedes, it will go back to normal very, very quickly. There's no residential properties on the ground floor. They have walkways they can pull out, similar to Venice. So if there's a flooding situation, people can still move about. And being German, all of the parking garages are sealed so the precious cars don't get damaged. So this is the kind of forward thinking we're seeing more and more now in the built environment, where this idea of resilience is integrated into the design right from the beginning. Another example which is slightly different, this is another project that we've developed in Hamburg, which is a building that actually produces resources. So these facade panels here, they contain green microalgae and and water. And you then pump carbon dioxide into it, and the algae grow through the carbon dioxide and the sunlight and so forth. You then got a little processing unit in the bottom where you can pull out this green slime, and you just basically produce biomass through the building facade that you can then use in an anaerobic digestion plant to produce biogas, or you can sell to the cosmetics industry because the lipids in the algae are actually what ends up in lipstick and so forth. So very, very interesting how buildings are moving away from consuming stuff to producing stuff. And for me, this is also part of the story of a more resilient built environment. Also rethinking infrastructure in cities and how we can use infrastructure to produce stuff. This is a cycle path here in the Netherlands where you've got integrated solar panels. So really starting to rethink how do we use our existing infrastructure to produce more stuff and consume less stuff and be more sustainable. Also rethinking how we use existing infrastructure. This is a really beautiful example of a tram system in Dresden where they've switched from only using it for passenger transport to also using it for goods logistics. So Volkswagen has a factory in the heart of the city, and rather than using trucks to deliver stuff to and from the factory, they now use the existing tram system. So they got this cargo tram. So very interesting how we can start to rethink the city to be more resilient. And it's also about bigger and broader city visions. So the final example from Hamburg. Hamburg has the goal of becoming a car-free city, or as much as possible within the next 2 decades. So part of this plan is to look at what existing green infrastructure solutions do we have in place, the parks, the pathways and so forth, and how can we connect those to create a network of cycle paths and walking paths to enable people to make smarter and more sustainable mobility choices. So big new city visions are also part of this overall shift towards more resilient and more sustainable city environments. The second topic, smart and autonomous systems. Drones are now an emerging topic in a lot of the conversations within our company. How will drones be used to maintain the built environment? How will drones be used for logistics, for example? So Alibaba, the Chinese e-commerce giant, they already got a trial running right now where they're delivering ginger tea to people in China. So you can order the ginger tea and it's delivered by a drone if you live within an hour's flight distance of their distribution centers in Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing. So they're delivering real goods to real people using drones already today. You can now also see the Amazon patents online where we've got this swipe to drop idea. So the drone will hover over you, you get your mobile phone out, you swipe and will drop the parcel and you just catch it. So these are all of the ideas that are emerging now of how this might be used. We as a company are also using drones already. So this is an image from a drone we use in Shenzhen in China to do land surveying. Because in China we've got a big problem to access data or access information that's accurate and reliable about the built environment. So we're now using drones to do land surveying for master planning and building projects and so forth. So very interesting how this is now becoming a common feature in our built environment. The Heathrow autonomous pods are an early example of how this could also be used as a mobility solution. This here is the Daimler Chrysler Freightliner. It's an autonomous truck. And it's just received a license in the state of Nevada, so it can now legally drive autonomously on the motorways in Nevada in the US to deliver goods and services. And these examples are now popping up all over the world where we're seeing autonomous vehicles starting to emerge and starting to be used to supply the built environment. And this is then for us now the time to think about what does it mean for us. This is what it looks like when an American trucker sits at the helm of one of these, really challenging the stereotype of what American trucking looks like. Overall, we think that there will be around 30 million autonomous vehicles by 2035, and up to 35% of them could be fully autonomous. So really where you just get in, you click a button and it drives you from A to B. They're kind of semi-autonomous, that's where you, for example, drive autonomously on a motorway. So there is distinctions between the types as well. But if these numbers are true, or if these numbers are right, then we have to start thinking about what does it mean for cities, for example. The design of parking, the design of buildings, the design of transport infrastructure, and so forth. Lots of people are already starting to do that. This is an aerial shot of a new testing facility by the University of Michigan. It's called M-City, and it will be eventually a test city where they've got kind of fake buildings and fake roads and so forth so that vehicle manufacturers can come there and test their vehicles. So the idea is that they will eventually have robot mums with robot babies pushing prams across the road so that the vehicles can check whether they're safe and they don't crash into people and so forth. Because so far we've only really been testing them on motorways and not really in a complex urban environment, which is very different in terms of the challenges that the technology faces in that context. New forms of human-machine collaboration are also part of this. This is the Vigo robotic telepresence. So you can sit at home and rather than Skyping with someone, you can Skype with someone, but also drive around a space. So you can have a meeting with someone and everyone sat around the table and one guy's in one of these and you can then go to a party afterwards and he can follow you and join for the drinks and so forth. And this has actually happened. My boss was at a networking event and the guy was sat at home drinking a glass of wine while they were having a meeting. So these things are real and we have to think about, again, how do we then integrate these new robotics into the built environment, into the urban fabric. Indoor wayfinding and navigation is another really interesting area for us. We are all so used to using our phones, Google Maps and so forth, to navigate the city. But as soon as you enter a building, they're useless because the GPS doesn't work and you can't navigate. There's now many, many different companies working on ways to use Wi-Fi triangulation or low-energy Bluetooth to allow us to navigate in a space. So you could be, for example, at this conference, and you could select a company that you want to see, and it would guide you to that place. It can also be used for parking garages or hospitals or airports or anywhere where this type of indoor navigation could be beneficial in terms of efficiency and user experience. All of this is really this part of this expanding Internet of Things or Internet of Everything, which you will all have heard about. Who's got one of these light bulbs at home? Anyone? It's a Philips Wi-Fi Internet-connected light bulb. You can buy it in the Apple Store on Regent Street, for example. It costs about £200. You get a pack of 3. You screw it into your existing light fittings, and you can then control your lights using your mobile phone or your tablet or whatever. You can set timers on it. You can make it react to stuff. So for example, you can then say, if it begins to rain outside, the lights can change. Or if your husband gets near the house, the lights can change, start flashing red. Whatever you want to do, basically. It's really, really interesting because all of these devices then start to be connected to the internet, and they can start to talk to stuff, and they can start to react to cues in the built environment. So really talking about a built environment that is much more reactive to what is happening, and that can act much more autonomously. There's about 16 billion connected devices that are part of the internet today, which is mainly mobile phones, laptops, desktops. And by 2020, that number will rise to 40 billion. And the interesting thing is that we're moving away from these communication-centered devices, like the laptops and the phones, to things that can actually do stuff, like light bulbs or fridges or windows or doors or whatever. And that really is a game changer for me in terms of how the built environment works. Data is another really interesting angle. This is anyone with O2? Anyone with O2 in the room? There you go. This is an example of how your data is sold by Telefonica to other companies, retailers, for example. So they've got the data of about 20% of the UK population, anyone that's with Telefonica, and they've got this product called SmartSeps. So as a retailer, you can go onto this platform and you can, for example, check the density of people in a space on a Sunday based on previous data of how many people were there. So you can go onto this little grid in Newcastle. It will tell you that the busiest time of the week in that grid is Sunday afternoon. You can get information about gender, you can get information about age profiles, about sex, about ethnicity, and so forth. And this data is already being sold by mobile phone companies without the customer knowing. I only found out because I went to a retail conference, and I was really shocked by the fact that this is being sold in that way without the customer knowing, because essentially I'm paying for this service. I don't expect it to be sold then my personal data to someone else. But this is the reality. So we have to think about how could that type of data be used by us in our context to make better decisions or to design a built environment that is more effective. Because if you think about things like transport and optimizing transport capacity in a city, this kind of stuff actually becomes very, very interesting. Just to give you a glimpse of the future, slightly scary, this is a little Band-Aid by a startup called MC10 in California. You stick it on your skin and it measures your vitals constantly in real time. So body temperature, hydration level, heart rate, UV exposure, sends that data to a central server. And the theory is that the ambulance will stop next to you before you're having a heart attack, because it's constantly monitoring you, constantly analyzing you, and being able to predict your health in real time. So this is coming, and this is again real, and the question for us has to be, how much of this do we want? Because just because the technology can do it doesn't necessarily mean that we want it or we need it in our own personal context. There is things that can be really practical and can be really beneficial, though, in particular when it comes to the built environment. So this is a little sensor there you see at the bottom. It's a parking sensor. It's a trial in New York where they put these sensors into public parking spaces, and it sends a signal to a server whether the parking spot is occupied or not. There's now also other systems by Siemens which do this slightly differently, but the idea is that you can then provide the drivers, the people driving across the city, with information about where they can park easily, because a lot of the proportion of traffic in cities is so-called parking space searching traffic. People just driving around looking for a spot. Really, really inefficient when it comes to energy consumption, carbon emission, and so forth. By providing a system like this, and this is another example from Paris, for example, you can go onto the app, you can see where there are free spots, you can find a spot much easily, much quicker, and so forth, reducing congestion, reducing carbon emissions, and reducing energy consumption when it comes to vehicle traffic in cities. And this is really what smart systems and the smart city for me is about, these practical solutions to existing challenges within the urban context. Overall, where do I think this topic is heading? I think we're seeing a much bigger diffusion of sensors within the built environment. So sensors that measure anything from light levels to carbon dioxide content and so forth. We're getting better data standards, so things can actually talk to each other, which didn't happen before. We're getting better at the analytics, so we can now make sense of that data and translate it into insights, into knowledge that is actionable. And then crucially, we're now also seeing these responsive systems, like the example of the light bulb, and I'm sure there will be many, many more, that then can autonomously react to all of this and make smart decisions and create a built environment that is much smarter and much more reactive to environmental cues. Okay. The final topic that I want to talk about is new patterns of value creation, just because I find it interesting for our industry. This is an image here of Tech Shop in the US. Has anyone heard of Tech Shop? Tech Shop is kind of like a gym membership for making stuff. So rather than paying about £40 a month and going to the gym and being able to use any machine you want, or the sauna, or the swimming pool, or whatever. Here you pay about $100 a month, and you can use any machine for making stuff. Plasma cutters, 3D printers, the latest Autodesk design software. You can attend classes on electronics. You can basically learn and use machines that can make anything. So people have gone in there and built jetpacks, motorbikes, iPad cases. Very, very interesting. And it's part of a trend for me in terms of how our industry, the design and construction, is really being democratized when it comes to access to the tools and the systems that were previously only available to large-scale companies that had the investment to do this. And this being much more available to people now, much more democratic processes around design, and really interesting how that could disrupt some of the processes that we in particular follow when it comes to buildings and construction. This is a nice little example of a concept for a 3D printed canal house in the Netherlands by DOS architects. They're working with the materials company Henkel in Germany. So this is what the finished product should look like, and this is the printer here. It's an upside-down shipping container. You got the printing unit at the bottom. It prints parts that are about 2 meters by 3 meters. You got control room at the top. You can just put it at the back of a truck, on a boat, or wherever, ship it across the world, put it up and start printing stuff, and then you just put the house together like Lego. Of course, this is all concept and it's prototype and it's never going to be able to deliver at scale right now, but it's an early glimpse into how buildings might be constructed and how on-site construction might work in the future. So very interesting to look at that. BIM, of course, there's loads of places here that are talking about BIM and the opportunities of BIM. Really, really interesting for us. For me, it's particularly interesting in terms of how it might allow us to collaborate and integrate the supply chain better. So our architects, designers, construction firms can work much more seamlessly across each other, reduce some of the inefficiencies in communication, and really rethink how a project is delivered using a digital model as the heart of the project. One thing that I find very interesting is disruptive internet companies, and to think about what could kill our business in Arab, for example. So what could be the Airbnb of the design and construction industry? Airbnb was founded in 2008 by 3 guys, so about 7 years ago, and they're now valued at something like $13 billion US. So in a few years, this company has now got 1 million listings, 25 million guests, and are valued more than Hyatt Hotels Group, which has spent decades building their portfolio. So very, very interesting to think about what kind of Airbnb or Uber or whatever could really, really disrupt our industry, the design, construction, engineering industry, and what would that mean for how we deliver projects and so forth. We know that it's important to think about this. We as Arab, we're about a 1 billion business, but you can see Blockbuster there used to be a 6 billion business, all the way to about 2008. They were doing fine. They had this amazing business model of people walking into a store, borrowing a DVD, taking it home, forgetting about it, bringing it in late, paying extra charges. Used to be amazing. And then Netflix comes, and it's just a click of a button. And suddenly you've got streaming at home. So something changed, and this business from 6 billion up there, bankrupt in 2010. This can change really, really rapidly. For us, again, it's really important to think about that as a risk and how we might deal for that going forward, because we know if we look at some of the information that's out there at the moment, for example, an article by The Economist about the future of work, the key sentence is in the middle. This could be bad news for the business models of professional service companies. We are a professional service company, so we then have to think about what does it mean for us and how can we be the Netflix of our industry and not the Blockbuster. So, slightly negative note, but that's what I wanted to finish on. So the 3 questions that we really have to ask ourselves are these. The first one is, what is normal? And hopefully your perception of normal will have already changed a little bit by seeing some of the case studies around the autonomous vehicles and the new solutions that are coming. The second question is, what will normal be? What are the trends driving the future of the built environment, and what does it mean for how your industry might behave and act and operate in the future? And the crucial question is really the last one. What do we want normal to be? Because we are in the privileged position of being designers and creators of the built environment, so we have to make sure that we make the right decisions to ensure that we create cities, spaces, buildings, and so forth that are right for us and for the future generations. Thank you very much. I've got time for some questions. Before we go there, all of the information and publications and so forth and things that my team does are available on our website for free. All the reports, you can download them for free. The website is called driversofchange.com. So please feel free to visit that and get in touch with me or someone else from the team. We'd be delighted to have a conversation also with you and your company. If there's any questions now, please raise your hands, and I will try to answer as well as possible.
How do you decide what you think the future will be? Who are the key people that you would engage with? Whose opinions, in a sense, do you value to give you that insight into the future?
So that's a really, really good and important question. So throwing out information like that is, as I agree, is interesting. But the question then is, how does it translate into actual design action? So one thing that we as a team really like doing is becoming part of other people's projects. So we will, for example, be invited to participate in a master planning project where our job would be to assess, for example, what the trends are shaping a certain part of the world. So we did a master planning project, for example, in South Africa, and our role then was to assess what the population projections were for that part of the world, what the aging profiles were for that part of the world, how we think the economy would change, because that's then all really, really valuable insight in terms of how you would design a city, for example. And that's at a city scale, and we also do that for building design projects where we, for example, do a workshop where we present a range of trends, and the participants in the room would then have a conversation about which trends they felt was most relevant to this particular project. So we often just seed the conversation with information about the future, and the stakeholders for a project would then take that away and decide what is most relevant to them. And that's then a facilitated process, if you like. So it ranges all the way from data gathering and research to facilitating conversations, if you like. But the end goal is always to impact the design decision or the strategic decision, in essence, where possible. Another example is some of the consulting work we're doing. We often work with innovation groups, and they've got the specific goal of designing a new product or finding a new product opportunity, for example. And there then we go all the way from the trends we're seeing, for example, in materials to how that would translate into a new product category within their existing portfolio. So it's always quite a long journey that has multiple processes in it, but the goal is usually, as I said, innovation, a strategy, or design change, or whatever. Thank you so much for spending time with me this morning and to listening to the talk. And as I said, if you want to catch up with me later or get in contact, please do so. Thank you very much.